we've got a guest in the studio. His name is Garland Favorito, and he is from the Atlanta metro area, and he is the plaintiff in a number of petitions against any number of governmental entities and individuals regarding the vote in Georgia, specifically in Fulton County, but not exclusively Fulton County. It has to do with the 2020 election and what was wrong with the voting machines, the tally, the audit, the counting, and all of the above, etc. But before we get into the specifics of each individual complaint, I'd like to get him to tell us a little bit about himself. So I'm going to begin as Ned in the first reader. Look, see, spot, run. Give me your name. Tell me your name.
Well, my name is Garland Favorito.
And where are you from originally? Where were you born?
I was born in West Virginia and grew up in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
And first I want to thank you for having me on. All-American Cool.
Well, thank you for, as they say, gracing us with your presence.
It's great to be in downtown Ringgold. It's a pretty cool town.
It is a great place to grow up, and we're very happy to have been fortunate enough to be able to live here and experience the freedoms that we've got. So, Garland, you were raised in Richmond, Virginia. You went to school where?
I went to school after high school, graduating high school in Richmond. I went to a computer school in Silver Spring, Maryland.
And this would have been many years ago.
Many years ago. This was so long ago that none of the universities had computer science courses at that time. So you had to go we went to a technical school that was specifically designed for computer programming, to teach computer programming, because there was no university, I don't think, in the entire country at that time that could teach you computer programming. It was that new.
You would have to go to a place like Georgia Tech, I guess, and somehow get involved in some kind of master's program or something like that.
Well, even at that time, I don't think Georgia Tech taught any computer programming.
Wow.
It was that long ago.
Okay.
There were no computer science programs.
I can tell you're not a teenager, but you don't look that old.
Well, mainframes had just come in back then, and I was, it's the power that's in your phone. Actually, that's probably 100 times what we had back in those days, and it would cost $500,000 and fill up the whole studio here. Just to do something really, really simple with 16K of memory. And imagine how many gigs you have on your phone today. So how many more times that is. It's hard to believe.
Was it something, did you ever fool with what they call punch cards?
Oh, yeah. My first program was on a punch card. It was a computer program. It was written on punch cards. You had to run them through a reader. Each card had an instruction on it, or it had data definition, one or the other. So that's how I first programmed a computer with punch cards. That's the way we did it back then.
Now, I've got a funny suspicion that you moved beyond that technology in your profession. What did you do for a living for, we'll say, 40 years?
Different kinds of computer technology. I started with mainframe computer program. We call it mainframe because that was the big IBM computers.
UNIVAC?
I did not. I worked on Burroughs. I didn't work on UNIVAC, but UNIVAC bought Burroughs.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then so I ended up working for the predecessor of the merged company.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, by the way, we liked the Burroughs computers even better than the IBMs back then because they didn't have something called JCL, which was your job control language. So the Burroughs could figure out how to execute the program without you giving it a separate set of instructions. So that was really advanced back then. So they had a really advanced software, more so than IBM. But IBM got there first, and they became more, they just took off, and Burroughs didn't really get that popular.
Yeah.
The banks used a lot of Burroughs, though, that equipment.
Yeah. So you mentioned banks. Were you involved in banking and IT in any way?
I was. I did. My most recent experience was with on online security. So for online banking, if you went in and you did your online banking through the web, then I did a lot of that kind of design and a lot of the security for that. We call it multi-factor security. That was at the end of my career, and in between there, I did computer programming, I did systems analysis, data administration, and also did system development methodology for large-scale mission-critical systems, and then went on to web design and then information security for banking. So that's kind of my career summed up in about a minute.
At some point in time, you moved from Richmond and somehow wound up in the Atlanta metropolitan area. When did that happen?
That happened has it been 40 years? I can't remember exactly. But it was quite a long time ago. I think it was around 1980 or something. And then I was I just felt like I wanted to change, and Atlanta just had everything that you could want to do and stuff that you shouldn't be doing on top of that. So I ended up moving there. I wanted a little bit bigger city and a little bit warmer climate, and I went from Richmond to Atlanta.
I think it's important to note that you were involved recently in security with IT in the banking business.
Mm-hmm.
Why would security be important in the banking business on IT?
Well, I think you probably know there's financial transactions are involved, and online banking, the internet system is very easily hackable. So we there's quite a sophisticated security systems around banking applications and things such as multi-factor security, where you have to identify yourself in multiple ways, maybe just not only with a password, but you have what they call out-of-band authentication, where you have to get a code sent to your phone to double-check, make sure that's you. There's all sorts of checks to prevent financial fraud. And we were, I guess, blessed to, I don't think there was ever a case where we had any type of problem with any kind of financial fraud, and we worked with in a top 10 bank in the United States. So,
okay. I don't want to ask which bank. I'm just saying that was something that you were doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're a plaintiff in many of these lawsuits. I don't know. Maybe you're a plaintiff in all of them. I know that you're a plaintiff in at least two. But these lawsuits. Let's begin. Let's begin with the one in Fulton County. We've heard a lot about that. Some people have called it a Henry County case. That's the way they talk about it up here, the Henry County case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you and I both know that it's not a Henry County case. Why don't you explain to the audience why they might think that it's a Henry County case?
Well, the reason that they think that is that it is being heard in Henry County, but it's being heard under the Fulton County jurisdiction. And the way that happened is we filed a complaint, and the chief judge of Fulton County, who allocates the complaints to judges, decided that it was an election challenge case and routed it to another judge who happened to go on down to Henry County, Judge Amaro. And we basically decided, after we said, no, this is not an election challenge because we were too late. At that point in time when we filed, we thought that Linwood and some of the other cases were going to carry the banner for us. But when they got dismissed, we then filed our case, but it was too late to challenge the election results. So we said we're just filing this as what we call an equal protection and due process case, and because we believe our rights were violated.
All right, I'm going to cut you off because I got ahead of myself. The plaintiff in this case is Garland Favorito, Michael Skupin, S-C-U-P-I-N, Skupin, Trevor Terrace, Sean D-R-A-I-M-E, Carolyn Jeffords, Stacy Doran, Christopher Peck, Robin Soter, or something like that, and Brandy Taylor. They're the petitioners in the Fulton County case.
And Stacy is up here. She's I think in the Dalton area. She's up in northwest Georgia.
Okay. So you, at some point in time, got interested in voter security and elections in Georgia. And you are the head of an organization that's a nonprofit, 501c3. What's the name of that organization?
It's called VoterGA, and that stands for Voters Organized for Trusted Election Results in Georgia.
That's a neat way to put it. That's a good acronym.
Technically, you would consider me to be the president. I'm we co-founder.
Is it a corporation or is it a private individual 501c3?
It's what they call I think it's called an unincorporated association. It's an association.
Okay, kind of like a club in a way, because, for example, the Kiwanis Club is a group of individuals who have a nonprofit purpose, and they associate with each other, and they have meetings occasionally, and they'll raise money for scholarships or maybe have a spaghetti supper or whatever. And the Internal Revenue Service will give them a 501c3 exemption because they are not trying to make money for themselves. Right. They're trying to do something that has a philanthropic purpose, a charitable purpose. Now, are there any paid employees of VoterGA? When I say paid, I mean regular salary. Let me just back up. Are you a paid employee of VoterGA?
I'm a volunteer. I don't take any salary, and I feel like that's important to maintain the credibility of the organization.
I see.
We do have some part-time administration help that we pay, and that's very, very reasonable. But you got
to have a bookkeeper. You got to have little stuff, administrative stuff like that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and we do have a little bit of paid staff, but part-time. There's nobody full-time. We just have a little bit of a contract, that type of work.
Now, how long have you been doing this?
Well, VoterGA was founded in 2006.
2006. What got you interested in it?
Well, what got me interested in this issue?
VoterGA.
Oh, and VoterGA. Well, the reason that we founded VoterGA was that we wanted to bring a lawsuit to challenge the original systems that were unverifiable to the voter. The old, what they call the DREs, direct recording electronic machines, that's the old touch screens where you enter your votes and then poof, it goes away. You have no trace of your vote at all or your ballot. So we believed that was not verifiable to the voter. It was not auditable for an elections official. It couldn't be recounted properly because there was no ballot. It couldn't be recounted for candidates, and it wasn't transparent.
Well, let's back up a minute. Okay. Me being the legal beagle that I am, why is it important to be able to recount the vote, or why is it important to verify the vote? Is there some reason that we have to do that?
Well, the reason is that we need to know that the results are correct and that the public can have confidence in the results.
I ask you a leading question, and I'm also going to answer it too.
Okay.
Isn't it true that the law requires that you be able to count the vote and recount it and that it be verifiable? Back when we had paper ballots, they were there, and there was a procedure for counting votes when there was a contest about the total. So I'm just asking you, were there any laws on the books that this computer did not meet, this system did not meet?
We found 13 counts in our original lawsuit. We found what we believe to be 13 violations of state law, and we submitted the lawsuit in state court.
And that's in state court in what county?
That was in Fulton County back in 2006.
Okay. What was the result or the outcome of that lawsuit, or was there any outcome of the lawsuit?
Absolutely. So the lawsuit first went to the Fulton County Superior Court. The judge, after a long time of kind of sitting on it, we actually had to have legislators call over and ask him, where's the brief, where's your order, and he finally released it, and he dismissed the case, and we read his order, which was reasonably comprehensive, and we concluded that he had, I think it was 17 different conclusions that didn't have any basis in facts or law of the case. So we appealed that to the Georgia Supreme Court. We went straight to the Georgia Supreme Court because it was an equal protection case. And the Georgia Supreme Court wrote the case off as well and dismissed it. And the judge, ironically, both of the judges who dismissed our case immediately retired. And they dismissed it on the grounds that they said that the legal grounds, you would appreciate this one, Marshall, but the legal grounds, I hear
that's fine.
They're coming to get me, I think. The legal grounds that the Supreme Court did not apply strict scrutiny to the constitutional right to vote. They used what they call rational basis, and they said that the state had a rational basis to do what they did, and that you as the voter have to take the responsibility yourself for ensuring that your ballot is correct and so on, because they had a rational basis for what they're doing. It actually got overturned 15 years later, back in 2019, by the U.S. District Court, who said, no, in fact, these machines are unconstitutional.
Whoa. Yeah. So wait a minute.
Okay.
You transferred the case. You turned it into a federal constitutional issue by appealing to the federal system. Is that the way it worked, or did you file a new lawsuit in federal court?
It was actually a new lawsuit that I was not personally involved in. However, our co-founder, Ricardo Davis, is a plaintiff in that case. It's known as Curling v. Raffensperger, which is another case. But that essentially accomplished what we were trying to do, 10, 12 years earlier.
So it took 10 years to get the courts in the federal system to turn the tide against a system that was determined to be unverifiable and a violation of our constitutional right to have a free, open, and verifiable election.
Yeah, that's right. The U.S. District Court basically confirmed what I had written to the Assistant Secretary of State and the original evaluator, the professor who implemented the system. I had written to them in 2002 that I believed it was unconstitutional because it was unverifiable and not auditable. The U.S. District Court, 17 years later, agreed with me, and they banned that system from future use in the state of Georgia.
Now, they banned that system in 2019. But by then, I'm assuming that Raffensperger, or whatever his name is, had already changed to a different system.
They were in the process. That decision in 2019 initiated the move to a new system.
And what was that new system?
The new system is called a Dominion Democracy Suite 5.5 system. Dominion to the voter. Voting system.
So it's the Dominion voting system that we've been hearing about on the news for the past 2 years or so, since the election results in the 2020 election.
Right. That was the first, 2020 was the first year that that system was used in Georgia.
And that system was a response, the purchase of that system and the creation of that system in Georgia was a response to the decision of a federal court that the system that they were using prior to then was not, well, you just use the term, it's not legal.
Well, that's exactly right. And the U.S. District Court found that the system was, well, it was not, I'm sorry, they actually found both systems are not legal. But the first one was basically found to be unconstitutional because it was not verifiable and auditable and so on and so on. And then the second system, which was implemented, the court also found was
We'll get to that.
Okay.
We're getting there, but we're going to take the people through a long ride here because this is important. Don't you think it's important, Lever?
Oh, it absolutely is important.
And
he seems to know what he's talking about.
Well, that's. I think that it's interesting. Not just interesting. It's miraculous that he has been working on this for 18 years. Mm-hmm. Really?
Yeah, it's actually almost 20. I started in 2002 in the summer.
And so by the time this 2020 election, and one of the things that I found amazing when I started doing my research on this, because I became curious because I was hearing, at best, conflicting statements of the talking heads from different arenas in the press about the 2020 election. And I thought, well, if there's a lawsuit, it's filed somewhere. And there are pleadings signed by the parties, probably with affidavits and sworn testimony. So what, I was thinking, where can I get this stuff? And I began finding these different lawsuits, and fortunately now you don't have to drive to Henry County to download what's been filed in the clerk's office. You can go on the internet, and if you're a part of Peach Court, you can just download it. And I began looking at the affidavits and thinking, scratching my head and thinking what I'm hearing from the press and what I'm seeing as sworn affidavits are two entirely different things. It's like white man speak with forked tongue, you know. You remember the old Western where the Tonto or whoever it is there, and the guy's trying to say this to him, and he says, white man speak with forked tongue. Well, well, that's what I'm thinking here on the news. I'm getting one thing, but here's a signed affidavit saying something entirely different. Now, either these people that have signed these affidavits are committing a fraud on the court and perjury, which is what it would amount to if it was untrue, or there perhaps is another affidavit somewhere that contradicts what they said, and there's some misunderstanding about what really did happen. And the more I looked at it, I said, there are no contrary affidavits.
That's right.
There are no other affidavits. There's no other testimony. And then I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. How is a judge dismissing a case? Why is a judge dismissing a case when the evidence is clear, sworn to, and can be admitted into court and presented to a judge, and him not have a hearing on it, but then dismisses it without a hearing. And I'm thinking to myself, there's something rotten in Denmark. Where did that come from? Rotten in Denmark. Is that because of the cheese that they make?
Oh, no, I think that's from a Shakespearean play.
A Shakespearean play. Something's rotten in Denmark. So anyway,
and in Henry County.
And in Henry County. That's right. Okay, so I wanted to go through this to get a history of what you've been through. I think that's important because I was thinking, how in the world did all of these lawsuits get filed so quickly? That's another thing. It's not something you don't walk in a lawyer's office and get a lawsuit filed in the next 15 hours unless you've got your act together. So first, let's begin with this petition for declaratory and injunctive relief in Fulton County. What brought that about?
What brought that about was we went to the Fulton County had an audit. Actually, the entire state had an audit of the presidential race. So in November 2020, the race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump was very close. There was a 11,779 vote declared margin of victory for Joe Biden in Georgia. And as we conducted the audit, because it was so close and because the Secretary of State was required to conduct an audit, he chose the presidential race, which was the right thing to do, to conduct an audit because it was so close. When the audit was conducted, the senior poll managers, 4 of them, and 2 audit monitors found counterfeit ballots while they were hand counting the results to see if they matched the machine results. And they then filed the sworn affidavits as soon as that audit was over. They brought it to the attention of the election officials, who told them to keep on counting and finish their job and don't worry about it. So after the audit was over, they all they signed those sworn affidavits, as you said, Marshall, under the penalty of perjury, and so that it could be known that there were counterfeit ballots in the Fulton County election results, and those, somebody needed to deal with those in one way, shape, or form. Okay, we're going to circle back on that. Here is another petition that is VoterGA and Philip Singleton petitioners versus the state of Georgia. What's that about? That is the argument that the voting system, and it's a lawsuit against the state, the voting system should be removed because the United States District Court has already found that the system is in violation of 2 Georgia laws. Specifically, what that means is this current voting system accumulates votes in a QR code that you as a voter cannot verify. So if you see Donald Trump on your selection summary in the QR code, which is accumulated, could say Joe Biden, or vice versa. And then that is a violation of Georgia statutes, according to the U.S. District Court, because the Georgia statute says that you must have an elector verifiable ballot, and the elector's choices must be in human readable text. The elector's choices are in the QR code, and that's not human readable text. So the judge found that the system violates both of those statutes, and did not order the relief because it was only 3 weeks before the election, and it was too close to change the system out that near to the date of the election. And then once the January 5th election was certified, about the end of January, then we waited a few more months, and when no relief still was granted, we brought that case in the Fulton County Superior Court.
What's the status of this case right now?
That case had a hearing on a motion to dismiss, and the judge has yet to rule on that motion.
And this has been going on since it was filed in September?
August, actually. Yes.
August, yeah.
Yes, August 24th, I think.
So it's been pending after a hearing since August. No, the hearing was held when?
The hearing was held in December.
December.
Mm-hmm.
So December,
15th.
you've got another 60 days. Why would it take a judge so long to render a decision on something that apparently was so clear?
Well, that's a very good question, because I believe it is clear, because the whole issue that the states raised, state would be the Attorney General's office representing the Secretary of State, was that they said that we were trying to go back and challenge the purchase of the system. Well, we were not doing that. We were challenging the future use of the system. And what we believe the law says is that as long as we are challenging future use of it, then that case should go forward. We're looking for proactive future relief.
In other words, you've got a case pending on appeal right now, and that deals with the last election.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a case pending now regarding the future election.
Right, and even the other case, the Fulton ballot case, that is seeking future relief. So we are seeking to look at the ballots and then have what we call declaratory relief from the judge.
Okay. Looking at the ballots. Which case wants to look at the ballots?
Well, the original, the Fulton ballot case with the sworn affidavits.
So the one that I talked about to begin with.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in that, among other things, you asked for was the right to look at the ballots in Fulton County.
That's right.
And where are the ballots now?
The ballots are in a warehouse, we believe, the Fulton County warehouse, and they were supposedly sealed up. However, we don't have proof of that. We have to take Fulton County's word for it.
I'll let that pause for just a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So anyway, they say they're under basically lock and key, and
Yes.
Nobody can get to them. But
Yes.
you have been unable to look. What is the purpose in getting to the ballots? Why do you want to look at the ballots?
Well, it appears that the ballots, once we could count the ballots, I think there's two things that could happen. One is we would identify the number of counterfeit ballots that are in the count.
What counterfeit?
Mm-hmm.
I know what a counterfeit dollar bill is.
Yes.
I don't know that I've ever seen one because I probably couldn't tell the difference. But what's a counterfeit ballot?
Well, if you know what you're looking for on a ballot, you can actually tell the difference. So the senior poll managers who caught this were counting, they were auditing mail-in ballots. And they
Who's they?
There were four senior poll managers: Susie Foyles, Barbara Houghton, Gordon and Francis Sonia Roll, and then there were several audit monitors on top of that. But they, I think Susie and Barbara were the ones that originally found these. And if you look, they're mail-in ballots, but if you look at them, they're not creased from being mailed, and they're not written with a writing instrument. They're not marked with the writing instruments. They're marked with what appears to be toner, and then they are not...
Let me ask you this. How would I take a ballot and put it in my copy machine and then select who I want to vote for using my copy machine?
How would you select what
I wanted to vote for? That's right.
Well, what you... I don't know that you can do that.
Because you got to use toner, and I don't know how to get toner on paper.
Yeah, well, that's the issue that they had. That's why one of the reasons why they felt that it was counterfeit.
Okay, so I'm not going to go to my copy machine unlock or open my copy machine, pull out my black toner cartridge, and get me a pair of tweezers, and get me some toner, and then put it on the mark where I want to vote for president, for governor, for secretary of state, for state representative, for congressman. And each time I reach into that toner bag or box and pull out a little piece of toner, and then I rub it in that little box to create a mark. But if I'm using toner, that's about the only way I would be able to use toner to create a vote on a ballot.
Well, and even if you did that, it would be detectable. This was
Why would it be detectable?
well, because you wouldn't be able, if you hand marked a ballot, you wouldn't be able to make that bubble as perfectly as if it was printed on there onto the ballot. And that's what they were seeing. They were seeing.
No, now, see, you're getting ahead of me.
Okay.
I'm assuming that all of these ballots had the same toner mark on them.
Well,
When I say same, they looked identical.
Exactly. Not only did they look identical, but they were on different paper stock, and they were voted identically the entire way down the ballot. They were all voted the
They
same
all
way.
voted for the same people.
Exactly. And that's what raised the suspicions of the senior poll manager.
So you say it's a different stock of paper. What do you mean by that? Because most people, they go to the copy machine, they slip in some white paper, they punch the copy button, and it spits out 200 copies.
Exactly. And the ballot stock is thicker. It's not something that you would normally have in a copy machine. So if you...
it's not the kind of paper that you would buy at Office Depot.
Exactly. And if you compared that paper that came out of your copy machine
Just
to that,
like
you can tell the difference.
Just like a counterfeit dollar bill.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have different paper than the original dollar bill.
Right. And you can test this yourself by next time that you have a ballot, you can check that against and feel it against a piece of copy paper, and you can feel the difference. The copy paper is much thinner.
Versus the ballot paper.
Exactly. Yeah, and then the fact that they were voted all the same way, the fact that they were not creased from being mailed, and that smooth, perfect circle that was put onto the ballot, which could probably have only been done by a printer. It certainly wasn't a handwritten mark of any kind, whether you used a pen or pencil or a toner.
So they printed the ballots with a computer, and then they copied that ballot.
That's what it looks to. That's what the affidavits are saying.
Yeah. Wow. And you can't see the ballots yet. They won't let you look at them.
That's right. The judge had ordered to unseal them. We were winning every time we went to court. We had been in court to do that about almost 10 months. The judge had gotten to the point where he was ready to set up the inspection.
And this is the Henry County judge.
That's right. And
hearing the Fulton County case.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the reason that was transferred, I don't know if we made that point earlier, was because the chief judge thought it was an election case. Then he transferred it to Henry County, and we opposed the fact that it was an election case, but we decided to just let it stay there. We thought that was where we were going to get reasonable treatment there, and therefore there was no reason to try to get it back to Fulton County. So we let it go there, even though technically it really shouldn't have been there.
Well, I have some ancient history about Henry County, but I won't mention that now. So anyway, and the colonel does too.
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
him talking about Henry County? He used to be in the
Mm-hmm.
legislature. He had some very interesting comments about the way things are done in Henry County.
Yeah, we can add to that now.
That's right. Okay, so So that where is that lawsuit right now? He dismissed it for lack of standing.
Yeah, he dismissed it for what he calls a particularized injury. And this is where we object to it. So the first thing is we argued that we do have a particularized injury, and you will probably appreciate this. So the three components are, first of all, you have to have an injury, you have to have causation, and then you have to have addressability. So we argued that we were injured because we had a group of voters whose votes were diluted by ballot box stuffing, and there was another group of voters whose votes were strengthened by ballot box stuffing. We had causation. The evidence shows that somebody stuffed the ballot box. And we have addressability. We're asking the judge to address the issue and give us some relief. At least let us look at the ballots and then make what we call declarative relief. We weren't suing for money or anything like that. We just want the judge to declare how many counterfeit ballots are there. That was what we were requesting. It's very, very simple. It's not really a major issue. So we made that argument verbally, and then we also quoted the U.S. Supreme Court precedents in our brief. And when he came back with a decision, it used an 11th Circuit decision from the Linwood case where the Justice Pryor wrote that Linwood was suing for himself and he needed to have a group of voters. Well, that's what we have. We have a group of voters. There's actually two separate sets of plaintiffs now. Two of our 9 split off, and we have 7, well, actually 7 split off from the 9, and then we have 2, and so we have 2 cases actually now. So we had all that. The judge makes the decision, and the decision violates what I believe to be 100 years of U.S. Supreme Court precedents, because the U.S. Supreme Court has said, all the way back in 1915, U.S. v. Mosley, that your right to vote, your right to have your vote count cannot is equally as open to protection as your right to put a ballot in the ballot box. And then you fast forward that to 1964, Reynolds v. Sims, and Reynolds v. Sims says your right to have your vote count cannot be diluted by ballot box stuffing. So that was what our case was, and we didn't have to have groups of voters or anything else according to the U.S. Supreme Court. So his ruling, as I believe, still to this day, violates 100 years of U.S. Supreme Court precedents, and we have appealed that ruling.
Now you have appealed it to the appeals court in the state of Georgia.
That's right. Now, we actually have 2 different sets of plaintiffs, and one of the group of the plaintiffs has appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court. We appealed to the Court of Appeals because our understanding of the law is that the Court of Appeals does facts and evidence appeals. The Supreme Court does more of an equal protection type clauses.
So they deal more with the U.S. constitutional and the state constitutional issues.
Right, exactly. So this appeared to be an issue of law and facts, so we appealed to the Georgia Court of Appeals. We don't know where they'll end up. They could end up in both cases, even though we went to different routes, could end up in the same court. It's possible that the Supreme Court could kick their case over to the Court of Appeals or vice versa. They may kick ours out.
Okay. The next, let's assume that for whatever reason, which has nothing to do with truth, the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court decide to dismiss or reject your appeal. Do you have a route to get into the federal court?
Yes. If we've exercised all of our state court options, then
That's right.
We have a right to go to the federal court.
You have to exercise all of your state options before you can go into the federal court to try and enforce a constitutional issue.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A U.S. constitutional issue.
That's my understanding.
And you haven't exhausted those yet. All right. Now, that's the Fulton County case. Now, I'm going to backpedal. for a minute. You filed a case in Gwinnett County. Was that over the 2020 election?
That was over the 2020 runoff election prior to the November election. That runoff, I believe, was held in August.
And that was a Superior Court judge race.
Yeah, very suspicious Superior Court judge race where the judge, who was an incumbent, she was in a 5-candidate race and won 37% of the vote, if I recall. Second place was 20%. So she had almost doubled the second place candidate. And then suddenly when they had the runoff, and it was just the two of them, she lost 60 to 40% approximately. So
so that person picked up 40%, and she picked up 3%.
That's right.
That's peculiar.
It certainly is, and we thought it was peculiar. That's why we sued to look at the ballot images.
Now, in order to count that, examine it, I think this is another thing that people need to understand. This was a runoff that involved the same Dominion voting machines. Is that right?
Yes, I believe it did. Mm-hmm. That was the first use of them, I believe, was in that primary and the runoff.
Okay. So those Dominion voting machines were used, and my point being, if there's a problem with them, then it would be possible to, and we haven't talked about this thus far in the interview. Thus far we've talked about the physical paper that was handed to the voter employee at the precinct and how it was marked and how it was put into the ballot box for safekeeping. Now, we're talking now about the use of the voting machines. Is there any problem with getting into these Dominion voting machines in Georgia? You being an IT, and I laid the foundation on your expertise, and you doing banking security. Is there any problem with the Dominion voting machines in getting to the tallies and changing the vote?
Now, is there any problem for us as the public to get to them, or is there any problem for a bad actor?
A bad actor.
There is not much of a problem for a bad actor to hack. In fact, there are lots of studies out there that shows that they are not secure, and those studies were provided to the Georgia legislature and the Secretary of State's office before they made the purchase of the machines. And in fact, the machines that we use were already rejected for use in the state of Texas and banned in Colorado before we had purchased them.
So what I'm getting at is that if you can get into these machines for a, quote, national election, what would prevent them from being able to get into machines on a local election? Is there any particular barrier that, this is local, that you can't get to them from here?
There's virtually no barrier between a national and a local election. If you can hack one, you can hack them all once you've gotten in.
Now, one of the favorite sayings of the poll workers is that these machines are not connected to the internet at the polling location, and no one can get to them during the voting. Now, those are the words that we have gotten here at this radio station with one of the voting officials here in Catoosa County. Of course, listen, he's a nice guy. Yeah. I like him. Known him a long time. He does not have your experience and your expertise on computer security. So we have to it'd be like me saying, no, there's no way, because it's not plugged in. What's he talking about?
Well, at a superficial level, you could believe that, but once you understand technology, you know that that's not really true. Also, previous evidence has come out from around the country on these particular machines. So we know quite a few things that contradict that line, and I'll have to take me a minute to go through all of them. First of all, we do have an eyewitness testimony that the machines can be programmed to remotely. The actual scanners and tabulators we know that were used in the November 2020 election. We have affidavits that indicate that these systems can be programmed remotely and to actually adjust on the fly. And in fact, it did happen, I think, in the January 2021 election.
Now tell me what you mean by programmed remotely. Now, let me tell you what I think about.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I think about when it comes to this is I'm Ned in the first reader. I don't know very much, but I know that when I am using my cell phone and I'm doing a search and I search for a wood lathe chisel, and I do that search on Google, and then the next day I pull up my phone and I go to Google, and at the top of the list, here's this nice little wood lathe chisel that is for sale. And I'm thinking to myself, how did they do that? And I'm thinking to myself, that is remote programming.
Well, yes, they recorded your preferences, and they remembered that you were looking for that, and then they found some similar types of products that were available, and they showed it to you so that you could see that. So if we could open the scanners and tabulars, we would find mobile chipsets in them. And we have found, I think one of them that has been opened, they had found that in another state. And
what's a mobile chipset?
So in other words, it would be the ability for that scanner or tabulate to communicate wirelessly to
a cell phone,
to the internet.
To the internet.
Yeah. Which
so
which could be a cell phone. But.
Yeah, which even though it's not plugged into the wall,
right.
Even though there is no wired connection, even though there may not be, I guess, a router. I guess there'd have to be a router in the room.
Most likely there would have to be a router or some type of device that would allow a connectivity to the internet.
And there are hotspots that can be created that would do that.
Exactly, and there could be other devices, TVs, smart thermostats, and that sort of thing in the room.
A smart thermostat
that could carry a signal.
That's just
think about that.
yeah.
Do you think these people wouldn't cheat on an election if it?
I'm sure they did.
A break. Back me up and.
Yeah.
But we have something. I don't know how. I'm not technical, but we have a remote administrator. I sit at home.
Yes.
And work on these computers here.
Yeah, he can change his program. If he doesn't like a song, he just logs on. I'm tired of that song. He just logs on here and plays something he likes.
Well, so this is that's funny. But yeah, that's very similar. That's a very similar analogy to what we have found. I think first of all, they do have, we believe, wireless chipsets. In fact, we found this at least in one machine of the same type in another state, and we have corroborating affidavits that say that during the election, the scanner tabulator was remotely changed to fix a problem that occurred during the election. It was rejecting ballots and that it shouldn't have been. So those are two examples.
In other words, the state remotely got into the device to fix a problem where they found out there was a problem in tabulating the votes or recognizing the votes or doing something with the paperwork. And they said, well, this is a problem that we need to fix. So they log into the voting system at the precinct, and then they fix it.
Well, in this case, it was actually the vendor. You have everything right, except for the vendor did it without the state's knowledge, or possibly did not have the state's knowledge when they did it. So
well,
and certainly
that's right. But the vendor is hired by the state.
That's right.
To help conduct the election, because these people down here at the Catoosa County voting system are not proficient to be able to program the Dominion voting system. They don't write the code. They can't go in and fix it.
And they couldn't, even if they knew how, they wouldn't be allowed to do that by the vendor because it's proprietary code. But those are two reasons, but there's actually even more reasons about hooking to the Internet. We know the other problem is when the machines are prepped for an election, that's when they are hooked to the Internet. Now, even if they were not hooked to the Internet, and even if they didn't have the chips, which we both know is not true, they can be, when they're programmed, the programming machine, which is typically a central Secretary of State's system, that one we have found historically was in fact connected to the Internet. So even if it was not connected on the day of the election, it was prepped from a machine that was connected to the Internet, and therefore the software, malware, could be downloaded to the machine, to each county server from the central Secretary of State server, without detection, and then that is used to prepare the voting machines or the ballot marking devices. So if you have malware at the central server in the Secretary of State's office, which we know was in fact exposed to the Internet back for years, in fact, from 2004 to 2017, that malware can be downloaded to the counties and to the voting system, and no one in the counties would know. So when, say, a county election board member tells you it's not connected to the Internet, as far as they know, they believe that it's not connected to the Internet because they don't know about all these technical things that are going on behind the scenes. They've never been told that, and they don't realize that. And so that's why you have a difference of opinion. Once you really understand the technology, then you know how subject it is and vulnerable to fraud. And that's why, all the technologists like myself are saying that, no, we got some problems. You need to be doing hand-marked paper ballots and not using all this electronic equipment that can easily be rigged.
Well, again, I'm Ned in the first reader. I think I have, because I've done so much work, and Richard and I both have done so much work on this programming of the musics, the digital jukebox system, and MP3 players, having to download things off of the Internet. We've got a kind of a working knowledge of transferring data from one computer to another. But I've noticed on occasion that I'll have on my phone a little notice that comes up that says security alert, possible malware. What are they talking about? Because you just used the term malware. I'm trying to give the audience a common sense view of really what you're talking about. And I know that you've explained it very well, and most people probably understood it. But I'd like you to explain that.
Yeah, so your phone has a lot of software on it, and they do different things. They have a text messaging application, a phone calling application, an email application, and an internet application. They're all software. But malware is also software, but it's just intended to do something nefarious to your phone, or to, in this case, to voting machines.
An app on a cell phone does generally something that you want, and that is a system operation that you want to happen. Malware, then I take it, is a system operation, an app, that you don't want. But it's the same thing. Am I wrong?
That's exactly right.
So, if I was a nefarious person and I wanted to put malware in the Dominion system, I would do it before the election. I would put it in there before the election, and unfortunately, I bet you anything, the Dominion system doesn't have a security alert system that pops up on the screen at the Boynton precinct that says, alert, malware present.
Well, that's exactly correct. The counties have no way to detect if the software they got from the state has any malware. So there's no detection mechanism
And
whatsoever.
let's talk about what malware would do. Malware would be something that could be programmed, an app, we'll say, programmed, loaded into the mainframe of some location that could be distributed to many locations or just in the main location in Atlanta. That at 11:05 on Election Day, the malware wakes up
Yes.
and begins doing something.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, that's a very good point because what you just said is exactly correct. And what that means is that the logic and accuracy testing that is done previous, you'll hear the elections directors say that we've already tested these machines. But what the key point that you just made is that the malware is designed to sleep through the testing and not activate so that the system behaves properly. Then on Election Day or early voting day, it knows to wake up, and there's several different ways that you can make that wake up, and then it will become active and then do something nefarious, such as switching votes from one candidate to another to rig an election.
Well, it could wake up on at the beginning of an early voting day,
Mm-hmm.
and then it could go to sleep. And then 3 days later, it could wake up again.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It's easy
And then
to
it could go
program.
to sleep. And then it could wake up on Election Day, if necessary, and do something else.
And then it could go back to sleep, and no one would ever know it's there, unless you had actually got access to the file itself.
Garland Favorito, who is a plaintiff in several lawsuits and is regarding the ballots and ballot integrity and the Dominion voting system and the one before Dominion. Let's begin again, and I want to mention to people a couple of things before we really get started, and that is you have a website, not you, but your organization, your association. And that website address is what?
VoterGA.org.
Very, very easy to find. VoterGA.org.
And we're also on almost all the social media platforms, and you can find us with hashtag VoterGA.
So if you want to get copies of the pleadings and the affidavits, interviews, explanations, video explanations.
She's a volunteer. That's Liza Miller, and she is a former Miss University of Georgia.
I see.
And she just called us up one day and said, I'll be glad to do the updates for you. And she's been doing that for a while. She always amazes me because she can deliver that whole update and look right into the camera and with no notes, and I can't do that.
So anyway, website, and now we're going to move into a couple of areas that we didn't get into that we need to get into so that people have a greater understanding of what it is that you've been doing. The Fulton County ballot inspection case, that is the case that we talked about mostly in our previous segment. And that's the case where you're trying to get access to the Fulton County ballots so that you can inspect them. Now, as part of this inspection, you used as evidence a reason for inspecting the ballots, events that occurred at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. So the main reason were the sworn affidavits that we talked about earlier of the counterfeit ballots that we're seeing. But in addition to that is the State Farm Arena video, which shows several violations of Georgia law. Basically, first problem was with the State Farm Arena is it was in a curved room. So they put the monitors in the back left corner of that room, and they couldn't see all the way around the corner to what was going on in the back right corner. So that's a transparency violation, we believe, of Georgia law. And in addition, they had these skirted tables that people have seen. Another violation, they were hiding ballots under the table. That's also a violation of Georgia transparency law. But that's not all. They announced that they were stopping the scanning for the night, but then they continued without the monitors. After the monitors left, then they continued the scanning, which is a violation of a different Georgia law.
Let's back up. Let's talk about monitors. I remember in my years ago when I was working in the Republican Party in Catoosa County as a volunteer, we had Democrats, all Democrats in Catoosa County. This is back in the early 80s. And they wouldn't allow us to have any poll workers. And there's a difference in a monitor, a poll worker, and a watcher. A poll worker is someone who is paid by the election board to sit at a table and perform the function of the election, which includes identifying people when they walk in, giving them the ballot, letting them exercise their right to vote, and then they take the ballot, put it in a box, and then later it's counted. Those are poll workers, and there's generally a half a dozen to a dozen on any precinct in Catoosa County, and they're paid. And then each party has an opportunity to have poll watchers, and these are volunteers that are selected by the county executive committee of the respective political parties, and they can watch what happens during an election. They can take notes, and they can be a witness in the event something untoward happens during the voting process. And then tell me about the monitor. What's the monitor?
Well, an audit monitor is very similar to a poll watcher. They're observers of the election, and they're not authorized to do any particular work.
Right, but they are appointed by someone, probably a political party?
Exactly. They could be appointed by a political party. So they could be media folks. They also do stories, and they typically are. I guess you would probably call them more of an observer.
But they are designated as such, and have to be designated prior to the opening of the polls. And the poll manager has to have their name, address, contact information, so that they know that this is just not some stranger off the street coming in watching what they do.
Right. That's right. And so typically an audit monitor is a poll. They're from a political party.
Right. So now then that I've laid the foundation of that, tell me what happened.
Well, in addition to what we talked about, these transparency violations, we had the skirted tables, the hidden ballots, the curved room. They then said that they were announcing that scanning had stopped for the night. the audit monitors, or actually the observers, stuck around for about a half an hour and waited for them to, as they packed up the tables and everything. Then they finally decided to leave. Once they left, Fulton County resumed scanning, which is...
No, wait, whoa. They stopped. Why did they stop?
They had decided to pack up for the night and start back the next day.
Okay, now somebody has a key to the front door in a situation like this. And when they stop, they're supposed to secure all this stuff, aren't they?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
And then they tell everybody they're quitting until the next day. And so rather than sit around and stare at four walls, everybody says, okay, I'll be back here when you open up. What time are you going to open up? And they tell them, and then they come back at that time. Mm-hmm. And the counting doesn't start until a specific time.
That's right.
So then what happened?
So they decided to resume. Apparently they were told by the Secretary of State to continue scanning, or the Secretary of State's office, and they continued to scan after the monitors left, which is also a violation of Georgia transparency
So
law.
the Secretary of State instructed these people in Atlanta to continue scanning ballots.
That's correct.
After all of the witnesses have been told that the poll is going to be closed.
That's correct.
And they are to go home.
Well, they weren't told to go home. They were told that the polls were closing, therefore they made the decision to go home on their own.
Yeah. Well, the only way they could stay there is, well, they couldn't stay there. If they were going to close the polls, so they'd call the police and have them removed because they couldn't leave them there by themselves. Mm-hmm. If the poll workers left and the poll manager left and locked the door, they couldn't lock the doors and leave poll watchers inside there with the ballots unsupervised.
That's right. So the envelope openers had left, but the scanners actually never did leave for several more hours. They resumed scanning and continued scanning the ballots. And you can see on the State Farm Arena video that there were quite a few ballots were duplicately scanned. So,
in other words, they have a stack of ballots and they scan them, and those ballots wind up in a tray because they don't do them one at a time. They do them as groups. And they pick up that group and they turned around and stuck them in the machine again?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes with a different individual scanning, sometimes the same individual. There was, now this could happen if there is a paper jam. It could happen legitimately, or some kind of a jam that the scanner has. But in these cases, you can see pretty clearly on the video that there was no scanning problem.
There's no mechanical issue.
Right, that would have caused them to rescan. So those are suspicious. And we did find about 375 that were duplicate scanned at a minimum. That many. So you see that on the video. It's another violation of Georgia law. And that's about 5 violations that are shown in the video.
Okay, the next thing has to do with affidavits in the Fulton County ballot inspection case. The people that signed these affidavits. An affidavit has to be, it's a sworn statement. Signed by somebody, just like somebody signing their income tax return.
Right.
They're swearing that the information in the income tax return is correct, and under penalty of perjury. It says that on the income tax return. So when you sign an affidavit to be attached to as evidence in a criminal, not a criminal, but a civil proceeding, you are under the same sanctions as in criminal court, because you're swearing under oath that these facts are true and correct under the penalty of perjury. Mm-hmm. So who are these people what were these affidavits, and who are these people that signed them? Because I'm assuming that you had to have these affidavits in order to initially file the lawsuit.
Well, that's exactly right. They're the key piece of evidence. And we talked earlier about the 6 affidavits that from the 4 senior poll managers and 2 audit monitors who found the counterfeit ballots. But in addition,
Now, say that again.
there were 4 senior poll managers and 2 audit monitors who found counterfeit ballots in the Fulton County audit when they were hand counting the votes to check them against the election results.
Okay.
So that was, and we talked a little bit about that, but what we didn't talk about, there were some other affidavits, one by Bridget Thorne, who was another poll manager, and she testified that, or swore an affidavit that her ballots, she was one of the ballot machine testers, and those ballots were not secured. So those were blank ballots that, the fact that they're not secured could have actually been used as to make fake ballots for the election. Somebody could have used those blank ballots, filled them out, and put them into machines. So that's her affidavit. That's one thing. And then another affidavit we have there by, I believe it's David Cross, who said that the many bags of those ballots were not secured. They're supposed to be locked. And I think he found, I can't remember, at least a half a dozen bags that were not locked. And therefore somebody could have come in and taken them out and replaced the ballots, that type of thing. So those were 2 more affidavits that called into question the handling of the election.
Okay. That kind of went over my head. You talk so fast, and this is so familiar to you. And you can just rattle these things off, and, you've said it 500 times, I'm sure. Tell me again about the bags.
Okay.
What are they?
Well, you saw, if you saw the State Farm Arena video, you saw them bring out those bags of ballots from under the table.
Okay.
So bags, ballots are put into large bags that look like a large suitcase. They're very similar to a suitcase. Those that we found, probably a half a dozen of those that were not secured. They're normally locked with zip tied and so on, so you can't get in them and change anything. However, during the audit, we found a half a dozen of those bags, and I think David did, that were not locked with zip tied. So that means that someone could go in there and replace the ballots with their own ballots, that they, assuming that they had access to the paper and the way to make it.
Okay, back up now. I've got these ballots. I've counted them. Okay? I'm getting ready to close up the precinct, and I'm going to go home. I take these ballots that I've counted, and I put them in we call it a bag, a suitcase.
Mm-hmm.
It's not masonite. It's cloth. Is it a cloth bag?
Yeah, it's a heavy cloth bag. It's very, very similar to a soft suitcase.
Okay. And so you put them in this, we'll call it a suitcase, for alliteration of people's minds, so they can get their mind around what it is they're doing. And so they put these in a suitcase, and there is a zipper that allows them to zip it closed.
Right, and then there's what they call a zip tie that they can put on there that locks that together.
Okay, a zip tie. Mm-hmm. Tell me what a zip tie is.
Oh, it's similar to what you would see on you've probably seen these, you can buy them in the store where they're kind of corrugated, and you wrap something up in it and pull that tie and it locks.
You can't pull it too. You have to get a pair of wire cutters or a pocket knife and cut that zip tie in order to unzip the suitcase.
That's right.
Okay, people use zip ties in the electrical business when they're zip tying cables so that it doesn't fall apart.
Exactly.
And if they need to get it apart, they get a wire cutter and they cut it, and they can work with the electrical.
And if you get something new in the store, a lot of times they come with zip ties on them.
Right. So at some point in time during the election process, the recount process, these suitcases were located for that precinct, and they were pulled out for the purposes of recounting. Somebody had to physically lift them up and probably put them on a table or something.
Right.
And they discovered that there was no zip tie.
Correct. The ballots could have been accessed by anyone if they had a nefarious
I cannot
purpose.
imagine being the manager of a precinct where the ballots have been counted and it's my responsibility to secure the ballots and put them in this suitcase and zip it back up and not put some kind of device on there that keeps the average person from just walking up and unzipping it.
Exactly.
Can you imagine that, Richard?
No. That makes no sense at all.
That, they say, well, it was too much trouble.
How much trouble could it be?
Or I forgot.
No, I'm
I'm
not buying that.
I'm not buying that.
No.
I don't buy that. I mean, even down here in Boynton or here in Catoosa County and all this of, well, it was an accident.
No.
Yeah, it's possible. But you'd have to be a blooming idiot. You'd have to be a blooming idiot. So I felt like it was important to get down and look at that and really see what happened. I can see how that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
There's actually pictures in the affidavits of the actual bags.
Yeah. Okay. That's a couple of them. Give another example. Do you want to give another example? Is there some other thing that we can talk about that was in Fulton physically that happened in the arena? This is really what we're talking about here.
Yeah, we can talk about the audit. I think we're going to talk about the audit a little bit later, and we have quite a few things that happened there that would be interesting.
We're going to change gears here.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to change gears with an audience because if you don't, what happens is their eyes begin to glaze over and their eyelids begin to close down and they begin to fall asleep. Okay, so anyway, there is a vote spike in this election on the night of the election. What is a vote spike? You pointed that out to me during the break.
So there were several unusual spikes, one or two in particular. As y'all know, when the election night was wrapping up to a close, Donald Trump had a large lead over Joe Biden in Georgia, and it appeared to be an insurmountable lead. And in fact, the Secretary of State said, in fact, it was an insurmountable lead, and that he had won the state of Georgia. However, in the middle of the night, suddenly there was this huge spike for Joe Biden of 136,000 to 29,000 votes, and that tipped Fulton County for him. And there was a lot of questions about whether or not that spike was legitimate, since it was so unusual.
And what causes, in your opinion, a vote spike like that? Because that's, as I understand, that's kind of abnormal.
Well, it's abnormal when it goes to one candidate. Well, the one that I witnessed, Joe Biden's totals went up by about 20,000, and it appeared that Donald Trump's totals had gone down 1,000 or so. That's not possible.
Oh, wait a minute. You're saying that the vote for Trump went down.
Correct. That's what it appeared to me to have seen. So I requested the interim results that are pushed from Fulton to the Secretary of State.
When you say you noticed it, did you notice this during the election process while you were watching TV?
No, I was actually on site. I was an observer at the tabulation warehouse. And then when I went home and
back up. What's the tabulation warehouse?
The tabulation warehouse is where they actually tabulate the votes.
Is this for Fulton County?
Mm-hmm. Fulton County, they have an election warehouse.
This is not the arena, State
Correct.
Farm. It's not the State Farm.
They scan in the State Farm Arena, but then they tabulate in the warehouse.
Do they?
So the ballots are transferred from the polling place to the warehouse.
That's right. They're transferred electronically.
Well,
The ballot images and the cast vote records, they're put on the little memory sticks that you can get in
the dime store.
In the store.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
now, wait a minute. Well, got to back up here. I thought the machines were never connected to the internet.
Well, now technically, if you put the there's a couple different things here. If you put them on a memory stick, technically that's not connected to the internet because they will take the memory stick over and put it in the tabulation servers, and that's one way to do it.
That way, it did not. You got it from the computer at the voting place, put it on a memory stick, put it in your car, took it over to the tabulation center, and handed the memory stick to a guy that operates a computer at the tabulation center, and that computer does not have to be connected to the internet.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I can see that is a situation where it was not connected to the internet. But you use the term sent over there via the internet.
Well, there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can hand carry them. You can also network the scanners at the State Farm Arena to the server at the warehouse. That's another way to do that.
Networking means that it will travel across the internet from that arena through an addressing system where you have certain addresses where this will go, and that becomes the network.
That's right. And now there are certain ways to do that that are secure, or reasonably secure. And when, for example, they have something called virtual private network. And that is sort of like a security tube that's sending this through the line, through the internet to that warehouse. But if you think of it, that they have a shield around everything.
Right.
So it's encapsulated. So that's a more secure way to transfer the data than if you just send it straight out on the internet with no protection whatsoever.
And so how was this done?
Yeah, it's not really clear. Fulton usually has a process where they put the memory sticks on and transfer the memory sticks there, and by hand. That's what they did during the recount. But there's some question as to whether or not they did that during the original count with State Farm Arena video, or whether or not those machines at the fair State Farm Arena were networked into the warehouse servers.
Okay. Let's keep going on the spike business. So you noticed the spike.
Right.
Because you were there.
Correct.
Why were you there?
Well, because it was going to be a tight election, and you want to be present to make sure everything goes correctly.
And you're from Fulton County.
I live in Fulton County, yes.
And so you're head of VoterGA. And you knew some of the people there, I would assume.
I did, and I know quite a few of them.
All right, and you showed
Some of the
up.
workers.
And so they said, well, Garland's here, right?
Yeah.
Did you think they knew he was there?
Of course it did. Did you have to get permission to show up? Did you have to get permission to stay there?
Typically you do, but this was, a lot of folks didn't need official permission because they had an observer area, and the public can come in and go to that observer area without being
designated as a poll watcher.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah. So I was designated as a poll watcher, but I'm not sure that I needed my credentials for that night because I think I was just in the public area, and you can see most of what's going on from a distance, but you can't see it up close, which sometimes you need to see it.
Okay, so you noticed this spike. Was this something that showed up on a TV screen?
Well, no, it showed up in results. So what happened, I went back and looked at the results, and it seems to me that, so first of all, I guess I need to back up. During the night, it's not just a one-time push from the Fulton County to the state results. They will upload interim results periodically throughout the night. And as they were uploading these, I noticed that suddenly Biden, from one interim result to the next, Biden's totals jumped about 20,000, and Trump's totals appeared to have gone down about 1,000. I filed an open records request for the interim results, and the interim results I thought maybe I'm crazy, maybe I just didn't read it right. So I said, okay, please send me the interim results. I want to see what happened, and I never got a response to my open records request. So I was never able to verify whether I was nuts and made a mistake, or whether there was something more nefarious there. And as a result, we saw this, later on in the night, we saw this huge spike, according to the line feeds that go out from Georgia. And Joe Biden's vote totals went up 136,000 votes, while Donald Trump's, I think, went up about 29,000. So that made the difference in the election right there.
Yeah.
It was 11,779 difference. That was a 100,000 vote spike in the middle of the night for Joe Biden. So
I noticed that there's a graph that I'm holding in my hand, and I know that this is not television, so I can't show it to the people on the screen, but I'm going to show it to you and ask you if this graph indicates anything of some import with regard to the spike.
Well, exactly. That graph shows Joe Biden behind Donald Trump. As the evening progressed, they gradually became farther apart. Donald Trump's lead gradually increased, and then suddenly, in the middle of the night, Joe Biden's totals suddenly abruptly went up to where they were almost equal to Donald Trump's, and then he eventually caught up and passed Donald Trump in the next day or two, while they were still counting.
Okay. All right. And, of course, you can say, well, that just happened to be Biden's strong precinct, and he would get...
Well, the problem is that they were mail-in ballots, so they were not coming in from any given precinct. They were coming in from all over Fulton County, and that's what made it a little bit more unusual.
Oh,
A lot more unusual, I would think.
so these are the mail-in ballots that came out that way.
Right. These were all mail-in ballots. All the other results had been processed. The early voting results and election day results, I believe, had already been processed.
And you don't know whether these ballots were folded, spindled, and mutilated or not, because you haven't been able to see them.
Right. They definitely were in good enough shape to go through the scanner, so
Yeah.
that much we know.
All right. We talked about the unsecured ballots of so forth. There is a ban the Dominion system lawsuit. This is a different one from the Fulton County. Now I can tell you're getting tired. If you want to quit, we can quit.
No,
But I want to keep asking.
Let's go for it. Let's finish this.
Okay. So there's this other lawsuit that's been filed. Who was the plaintiff in this banned Dominion system lawsuit?
There's two sets of plaintiffs, much like there is in our case. Our case now has two sets of plaintiffs. The Fulton ballot inspection case was 7 of us split off from the 2, and we have separate lawyers, but we're trying to achieve the same thing. In the Curling v. Raffensperger case, there's two sets of plaintiffs who had some disagreements, and they split off, and they're both trying to achieve the same thing. That was the lawsuit that had the legendary landmark decision that banned the old systems. So the Curling plaintiffs, and then there's another group called the Coalition plaintiffs. Our co-founder, Ricardo Davis, is on this lawsuit, which resulted in the banning of the old system. That was quite a national landmark ruling, the first time that direct recording electronic devices, the old touchscreen machines, were banned from use. So it was a huge decision. And
this was a federal court decision.
Mm-hmm, in 2019.
And it had worked its way up through the state court system into the federal court system. And then the federal court determined they needed to end this system, right?
That's right. Well, except for the fact this lawsuit actually started in the federal court system.
Oh, okay.
They were wise enough not to go into state court. So what I think when we realized, 10 years earlier, what we didn't understand was that it's very hard to get a state superior court judge to rule against the state because they have a vested interest in protecting the state.
That's right.
Whereas in a federal court system, the federal court is not necessarily so aligned to protect the state. So they wisely went into federal court and with a similar case than what we had, and they got a better outcome, a better result.
Okay. And why was there's an audit that didn't verify the results? What's that about?
Oh, the audit. So we've been talking about this audit all the time, the Fulton County audit where they found the counterfeit ballots. But the Secretary of State has continued to say, well, we conducted an audit, and the audit proved that the hand count, the original count of the machines was correct. Well, in July, we had a press conference, and we exposed the problems with the audit. And there were quite a few problems. First one was that there was a 60% error rate in the audit. So when we looked at the audit results by batch, each batch is about 100 votes, we counted up the ballot images for that batch because you can identify the batch, and we had gotten ballot images to be public records in the legislature last year in March, and that was a landmark thing for us. And it helped open us the door so we can do some real analysis of what actually happened in the November 2020 election. So we did the analysis, and we found that for every batch, which is typically 100 votes, the results that were reported didn't match the images that we had. So, for example, I'll give you some example that we had a lot of falsified tally sheets. So, at least 7 of them. But in one case, we had the images said that there were 60 votes for Joe Biden and 40 for Donald Trump. Well, if you look at the tally sheet, which was filled out by the auditor when they're hand counting those ballots, after they've done a batch of 100, the tally sheet said 100-0 for Joe Biden, even though the actual images said 60-40 for that same batch. We found 7 of those, 850-0 for Joe Biden.
Wait, whoa. Mm-hmm. I heard what you said, but I'm going to have that explained to me again. That it was initially 60-40, but in the hand count it was what?
So it would help me if I explain the hand count. Here's how it works. The hand count audit, 2 individuals are given a batch of 100 at a time, or actually they do a batch of 100 at a time. Typically they're given a box, and each box has 100 ballots per batch, as a general rule. And they count that, and they said, okay, how many do you have for Biden and how many do you have for Trump after this 100? And then they fill out a tally sheet on that. And the tally sheet, they write down, okay, Joe Biden got 60, Donald Trump got 40, maybe Joe Jorgensen maybe had gotten 3. Joe Jorgensen's a libertarian candidate. So when we compared what they wrote down, the auditors wrote down on the tally sheet with what the actual images really said, it didn't match. The images said something different than what the tally sheet said.
So what?
60% of the time.
So the hand count was different than the image count.
No, they wrote it down. They wrote it down different.
Oh, they wrote it down different.
If I understood what he said.
Mm-hmm. They wrote it down differently. Or what happened was they might have written it down correctly and the original results are wrong.
Well, okay.
It could go either way. Could go either way. The Secretary of State didn't seem to want to find out which one it was, though.
But how could you, how would you resolve that issue? If you've got the ballots, can't you resolve that issue?
You could count the physical ballots and then decide, well, which one was right. And that's what we were trying to do.
I got you.
So we had this 60% error rate. That's it's unheard of. Typically an audit error rate is like, 0.6%, maybe or 0.06, but not 60%, not 6 or even 16, but 60. Wow. So that's crazy. Then we had the falsified tally sheets. There were 7 of those that had 850 to nothing for Joe Biden, but that's not what the images said. Then we found duplicate scanned ballots in the audit, ballots that were scanned multiple times. And then we found duplicate reported ballots. So the audit, there were 4,000.
Now, you found all this out without getting access to all of the ballots? Just a sample?
We found this out by analyzing the ballot images that became public records.
Oh.
And the images don't match what the reported results are, or what the audit claims. So nothing added up. And to add more strange things to it, 50,000 of those audit records were added, tally sheets and so on, were added after the fact in both Fulton and Cobb counties. They didn't have those when they originally had done the audit. So the whole problem, to sum it up, is that how could this audit have possibly confirmed the election results if it had a 60% error rate and it had falsified tally sheets and 4,000 duplicate reported ballots in it? It's just not possible that it could have verified the original results.
Wow.
Okay. Now, ballot images destroyed.
So when we got the ballot images, we made open records requests statewide for ballot images. And what we found was, this is what we used to try to verify the
count.
The count, exactly. But what we found was that about 70 counties had destroyed their original ballot images, or they refused to reply to or comply with our open records request. 56 of those counties, I think it was 56 counties, admitted that they had destroyed the original records, which they were supposed to retain for 2 years under federal and state law. They had instead destroyed them, and they pointed to a email. One county pointed to an email they got from the state elections director, the former one, saying that it was okay to overwrite the cards and get rid of the old images and put something new on for the next election. And the state election board rule also allowed them to do that. But both the rule and the elections director's instructions violate both federal and state law.
So the counties did what the state told them to do because they were not familiar enough with the law, so they relied on their, you might say, superiors who have greater knowledge of the law to, and that's what the Secretary of State's office is for, because these poll workers that are in precincts, they can't know all of the election statutes. I mean, that's nuts. So you have procedures that help them follow the law, and then when they've got a question, they pick up the phone and call somebody at the Secretary of State's office. Is that basically what we're talking about?
Yes, exactly.
And so when after the election was over, they were supposed to retain these images for 2 years, but then they were told they could delete them, and there's emails from the Secretary of State's office saying that you can.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I need to pause on that for just a minute.
And there's a state election board rule that says that it's okay to do that. So the state election board violated federal and state law.
I have to pause on that for just a minute. to take that in.
And nothing happened.
This is where a trial lawyer just kind of pauses and looks at the jury.
Yeah.
Okay. The next is the chain of custody videos.
Yes. So just last week, we released our chain of custody study, and there's several different aspects to that. One is the actual chain of custody form problems, and then we have the issue with the videos. I'll start with the forms. We analyzed the forms, and
this form. Okay.
Sure.
You talk to somebody about filling out a government form, and their head begins to spin because they're all the time having to fill out income tax things, and they just barely can do their income tax if they don't make any money. I don't bother with my income tax return because it's just too complicated. And I think about filling out a government form, and I just don't want to do it. So what are these forms like? What is it? There's all kinds of forms.
Yeah, it's a very simple form to fill out. Basically, the collection team, when they pick up ballots from a drop box, they put the date and time they picked it up. Two of them sign it, and then they take it over to the election center that same day, and somebody signs for it, brings them in.
That's like a chain of custody for a weapon in a murder case.
Exactly.
They pick it up at the scene, they put it in a bag, they tag it, somebody signs the tag, and they put it in their car, and they're responsible for it until they get back to headquarters, and then they, I guess you'd call, book it in, and then they hand it to whoever is in charge of the inventory at the jail, and then they give it a tag or they sign for it, and then they put it in some kind of secure device, a safe, a cabinet, something that says this is for this murder case.
That's a perfect analogy.
So, and really, when you think about it, ballots are evidence.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they are.
Right.
And so there's a chain of custody for the evidence.
Yes. But what we found out in this case was that we found a lot of rules violations. For example, maybe they're supposed to have two people pick it up, and they would only have one. Or they'd have pickups that were completely unsigned by the team members, or they were unsigned by the recipient at the election center. Those were just a few of the violations that we found on the forms. But here's another one. They also found forms that had impossibilities. We found forms that were signed we have two different poll locations that are half an hour apart, but yet the form showed that they picked them up 3 minutes apart. Another rule violation I forgot
That's the old 3-minute rule.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Another rule violation that I forgot to mention was they held the ballots overnight, and they're supposed to take them in that day, and we would find forms that were received from the team members the next day. The ballots were received, and who knows what happened overnight? They could have been switched out or anything like that. Here's another couple of kickers for impossibilities. We found pickups that occurred before the box was ever installed. We had literally about a week or two, I think one of them was 2 weeks. We know that the drop box was installed on, let's say, September 15th, for example, but they would have had maybe a pickup on September 3rd or something like that. So we know that that's not right. We even found that pickups after the election was over, the day after. And none of those things are possible, at least they shouldn't be. But those are all things that are just wrong with the forms. But it gets worse. See, because nobody in the state knows how many ballots were put into the drop boxes. Because we had many, many forms missing. We found 107,000 forms that were improperly filled out, but that doesn't account for all the forms that were missing. We would find day after day of forms missing, but we don't know how many ballots were collected.
Yeah.
So no one knows in the state how many ballots were actually collected from these drop boxes. And the estimate is that there was probably another 350,000 missing. And that doesn't include yet, we still have not included all of the counties who have not supplied their oaths for the team members that they were supposed to have signed. A lot of counties don't have those. That's another violation of the rules. There's also the counties that they've destroyed their video surveillance, and that should have been withheld or kept for 2 years because it's an election record. And that's what federal and state law indicate. So those are some of the problems that we had with drop boxes. And in addition, the other kicker is that we show the video, and you can show a Dropbox pickup at nighttime. You can't see who's there and where they're putting in the box because the camera's too far away, and it's nighttime and you can't see. It's mounted behind the box instead of in front. Nobody can see what is going on. So it was all useless. It's just wholly inadequate.
Why should we have an election audit?
Well, for all these reasons.
And when I say election audit, we're not talking about an audit of a particular precinct, are we?
Correct. We're talking about audit of a whole county. An independent audit is what needs to be done. We need to look at the ballots and see if they map up with the counts.
And you're specifically thinking about Fulton County.
Fulton is a key county, but not the only one. There are questions about Gwinnett, DeKalb, and Cobb in particular. They all need to be audited. They all have very strange discrepancies that are not easily explainable.
And so that, of course, when you think about the number of counties that have destroyed the evidence, and it's been requested, what are we going to do in the future about that? I mean, that's the purpose of this lawsuit, right?
Well, that we need to bring another lawsuit to take care of that because we're going to have to force the state election board to change its rule and then the state to give proper instructions, which is not to the counties, that's not happening right now. Okay. Well, how much more can we talk about this? We could talk another hour, but we're not going to. We're going to wind this thing up. I've got on here billboard campaign. Oh, yeah. What's a billboard? What are you talking about that? So we've started for the audit. The reason we need to audit is we need to inspect the ballots and make sure that the counts add up. So we are pressing the legislature to do that. We have a billboard campaign now that's starting up. AuditGAnow.com is the handling most of the billboard campaign. And we've got some pretty clever, funny billboards that are up to try to, and they've got a whole variety of them, but we're trying to trigger interest in billboards and kind of do it with a little bit of humor to get people who are not normally involved and concerned about the audit process. Where can they see samples of these billboards? I believe we have one on 75 somewhere. There's one on 575. I think there's one on 316 over in Gwinnett. There's one down or two down in Savannah on I-16, I believe. Do you have any pictures of these billboards on your website? They are. They're all on the auditganow.com website. And we have one sample on VoterGA.org. If somebody wants to help VoterGA, how do they do that? What do you need to help? Well, there's several different things they can do. VoterGA.org has a volunteer tab, and you can go and volunteer. And then now let's talk about a volunteer. What does a volunteer do? Well, a volunteer can do almost anything that they want to help the organization. Typically, different people have different skills. We have people who analyze the ballot images. They're like data analysts. We have people who organize events for us. We have put on a lot of really nice events and outreach, and that's another area. We have people who volunteer help on social media, which is extremely helpful. And it's almost, we have some website help and that type of thing. So it's a matter of what their skills are and what they would like to do.
Okay. Is there a way to contribute cash? Because cash is always good, even though you don't take a salary. There are things that I'm sure you'd like to do. What are some things you'd like to do?
Well, we have to bring these lawsuits that we're talking about. We have not brought them all, and we would need to do that. And, of course, that does take money. VoterGA.org, the donate tab is where you can make a donation. It's tax deductible. It's a 501c3 organization. And as you said, I don't take a salary. And so almost all the money will go straight to one of these lawsuits that will help make the officials in Georgia accountable to run good, transparent elections.
Okay. Richard?
Be sure to keep us informed.
I sure will. I have a feeling we're going to be back here a few times.
Yeah,
I hope
maybe so, yeah.
I hope so. I hope you'll find a place to light around here every once in a while, a place where you can kind of spin around and, I think I'm going to go there for a little while.
Yeah.
That'll be good. All right. Well, listen, this has been a very enlightening discussion, Garland. You've been listening to an interview of Garland Favorito. Did I pronounce it right?
Perfectly.
And he is from Atlanta. He is we might say the head person for VoterGA, a 501c3 nonprofit association of people who want to have free and fair elections that are properly counted and have as one of their driving forces. I'm going to make this statement. You didn't actually say this. I think you did say it once. I'm not sure. But to return to paper ballots in our vote and to get rid of the machines that can be manipulated. Is that an accurate statement?
That certainly is an accurate statement.
All right.
All right. The website's one more time. VoterGA.org.
That's it.
And AuditGeorgiaNow.com.
That is it. They're both. That's the.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed being here.